A quiet thank you today to Natalie Green from Portland and Jenna Walsh from Kansas City. You two, like so many women here, are always the ones leaving thoughtful, emotional messages after every story. I notice it, and I appreciate it deeply. Now, about today's story. The final moment is not loud. It's the kind that creeps in slowly, and then stays with you for hours. But YouTube only releases the ending to subscribers. If you're not subscribed, that final truth vanishes. So subscribe, tap, like, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing the dots appear across the map. Before we begin, I need you to understand something incredible. What you're about to read will forever change how you think about second chances, hidden heroes, and the kind of love that heals the deepest wounds. A desperate child, a decorated surgeon hiding in plain sight, and one terrifying night that would reveal the truth and transform 3 lives forever. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it. Now, because this story has an ending so powerful, so moving, you won't believe it. And you definitely don't want to miss the other incredible stories we have coming your way. Trust me on this. Now, let's begin. My mom, she's hurt. They hurt her, and she won't wake up. 6-year-old Emma Harrison burst through the lobby doors of Harrison Technologies. Her white dress was torn and dirty, streaked with marks that looked like she'd been running. Behind her came the nanny, Mrs. Chen, phone pressed to her ear, her face pale with panic. Employees froze mid-conversation. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. A security guard moved forward, already reaching for his radio, but Emma ran straight past everyone, her small legs pumping, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't stop at the reception desk. She didn't look for any of the executives. She ran straight to the janitor mopping the marble floor in the corner by the elevators. Her small hands grabbed his gray uniform with desperate strength, nearly pulling him off balance. "Mr. Benjamin, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "She needs help now. Right now. Please." The man looked down at her. His weathered face, marked by lines that spoke of years lived hard, showed nothing at first. No surprise. No alarm. Just that same quiet neutrality he always wore. But then something changed in his eyes. They sharpened, became cold and focused, the way a soldier's eyes look when they hear gunfire in the distance. He set down his mop, without a word, letting it clatter against the bucket. "Show me where," he said simply. Benjamin Carter had been invisible for 3 years. Every morning at exactly 5 a.m. he came through the service entrance on the east side of the building, the one the executives didn't even know existed. He swiped his time card, heard the mechanical punch that marked his arrival, and disappeared into the vast network of corridors that made up Harrison Technologies' 30-story headquarters. He cleaned bathrooms, scrubbing toilets and sinks until they gleamed. He emptied trash cans, removing evidence of the thousands of people who worked here. He mopped floors, vacuumed carpets, wiped down conference room tables still sticky with spilled coffee and the residue of lunch meetings. He did it all while employees talked around him, over him, through him, as if he were simply another piece of furniture, as invisible as the chairs they sat in or the desks they worked at. At 39 years old, Benjamin looked older than his years. Gray hair threaded through the dark at his temples. Deep lines creased the corners of his eyes, the kind of lines that come from squinting in harsh sunlight or from seeing things you wish you could unsee. His hands were scarred, old burns on the backs of his fingers, a thick white line across his left palm, calluses that spoke of work that went beyond pushing a mop. But those hands moved with practiced efficiency, precise, economical, never wasting emotion. He never made eye contact with anyone, never joined the casual conversations that happened around the water cooler or in the break rooms, never stopped in one place long enough for anyone to really notice him, really see him. He was a ghost moving through their world, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Management appreciated his silence. He was reliable, never missed a day, never complained, never asked for anything. He was invisible. They could forget he existed until they needed something. Cleaned. He was easy to forget, and that made him perfect. Benjamin lived in a basement apartment 6 blocks away from Harrison Technologies. It was in an old building that should have been condemned years ago, but the landlord kept finding ways to pass inspections. Rent was cheap, $400 a month, because the ceiling leaked every time it rained, leaving brown water stains across the cracked plaster. The heat barely worked, rattling and clanking, but producing more noise than warmth. Winter. Benjamin slept in his jacket. He didn't mind. He owned almost nothing anyway. A narrow bed with a thin mattress that hurt his back. A small table he'd found on the street, its surface scarred with cigarette burns from previous owners. 2 mismatched chairs. A hot plate for cooking that only had one working burner. A mini fridge that hummed too loudly and froze everything in the back. On the scratched dresser by the bed sat a single framed photograph, 5 by 7 inches, in a cheap frame from the dollar store. Benjamin kept it face down. He hadn't looked at it in 2 years. Couldn't look at it. Because every time he did, he saw her smile, heard her laugh, remembered everything he'd lost and could never get back. Most evenings, after his shift ended at 2 p.m., Benjamin didn't go home. He went to a community clinic in the poorest part of Boston, in a neighborhood where police cars cruised with their windows up and doors locked. The clinic operated out of a converted warehouse, drafty and cold, with donated equipment that was outdated when it was new. Benjamin volunteered there, teaching basic first aid to anyone who would listen. Mostly street kids, teenagers with nowhere to go and no one who cared. Elderly folks who'd been forgotten by the system, who couldn't afford real medical care and had learned to make do with whatever help they could find. Ex-cons trying to turn their lives around. Addicts in various stages of recovery. Homeless men and women who needed to know how to survive another winter on the streets. He showed them how to clean wounds properly, how to recognize the signs of infection before it became sepsis, how to identify the symptoms of shock, how to perform CPR, counting out the compressions in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pressing down hard enough to save a life but not so hard you broke ribs. How to stop bleeding, how to splint a broken bone, how to save someone's life with nothing but your hands and whatever supplies. You could scavenge. He never told them he'd once been a doctor. Never mentioned that he'd performed surgery in field hospitals under mortar fire, had saved lives with nothing but a penknife and dental floss when the supplies ran out. Never told anyone. The past was the past. It didn't matter who he'd been. Only who he was now, a janitor, invisible, alone. That was enough. That was all he deserved. Victoria Harrison was everything Benjamin Carter wasn't. Visible, powerful, successful, the kind of person who commanded attention the moment she walked into a room. At 34 years old, she'd taken over Harrison Technologies after her father's sudden death 3 years ago. Heart attack at his desk, they said. One moment he was reviewing quarterly reports, the next he was gone. Victoria had been vice president of operations at the time, but nobody thought she could handle the CEO position. She was too young, they said, too inexperienced. A woman in a male-dominated tech industry. She'd run the company into the ground within a year. They were wrong. Victoria transformed Harrison Tech from a struggling mid-tier software company into a major player in corporate solutions. She cut dead weight, renegotiated contracts, brought in fresh talent, and pushed for innovation in cloud-based security systems that put them ahead of their competitors. In 3 years, she'd tripled their revenue and quintupled their stock price. She worked 16-hour days, sometimes 18. She flew to investor meetings in New York, Seattle, and San Francisco, sometimes hitting all 3 cities in a single week. She negotiated million-dollar contracts while sitting in airport lounges, her laptop balanced on her knees, her daughter coloring pictures on the floor beside her, because the nanny had called in sick, and there was no one else to watch Emma. Being a single mother and CEO meant Victoria rarely slept more than 4 hours a night. She survived on coffee, black, strong, constantly, refilled, and whatever food she could grab between meetings. She'd lost 15 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, and the shadows under her eyes were so dark that makeup couldn't hide them anymore. But Victoria didn't complain. This was the life she chose when she divorced Emma's father 2 years ago. Richard Harrison, no relation despite sharing a last name, had been everything she thought she wanted. Handsome, charming, from a good family. But he'd wanted a trophy wife who hosted dinner parties and looked good on his arm at charity galas. He hadn't wanted a partner who had her own ambitions, her own career, her own mind. The divorce had been bitter. Richard fought for custody out of spite, not love, and when he lost, he'd made it clear he had no interest in being a part-time father. He saw Emma every other weekend, when he remembered, and spent most of that time on his phone conducting business while Emma sat alone in his penthouse apartment, watching TV and wishing she could go home. Now Victoria answered to no one except her daughter and her shareholders. She'd built a life on her own terms. It was exhausting and lonely, and sometimes felt like drowning, but it was hers. Lately, though, something was wrong. Something beyond the normal stress of running a multi-million-dollar company. Numbers didn't add up in the quarterly reports. She'd noticed it 3 months ago. Small discrepancies at first. A few $1,000s here, 10,000 there. Easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully. But Victoria was always looking carefully. It was how she'd built this company, by paying attention to details everyone else overlooked. She started digging deeper, found accounts that shouldn't exist, payments to vendors she'd never heard of, invoices for services never rendered. Money was moving through Harrison Tech like water through a sieve, and someone was catching it on the other side. When she confronted her CFO, Marcus Reynolds, about the discrepancies, he'd smiled. That smooth, practiced smile of his, and assured her everything was fine. Just accounting errors, he said. New software implementation causing some temporary confusion in the books. Nothing to worry about. He'd have it sorted out by next quarter. Victoria didn't believe him. She'd known Marcus for 15 years, since before her father died. He'd been her father's best friend, the man who'd taught her everything she knew about corporate finance. She'd trusted him completely, but that smile hadn't reached his eyes. And when he'd left her office, she'd noticed his hands were shaking. Victoria Harrison wasn't naive. She knew exactly what she'd found. Embezzlement, fraud, theft on a massive scale, and she knew who was behind it. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Emma Harrison was supposed to be at ballet class every Thursday evening. Mrs. Chen picked her up from school at 3 o'clock, drove her to Miss Patricia's school of dance, and sat in the waiting room with the other nannies while Emma practiced her pliés and pirouettes. That was the plan. That was what Victoria paid Mrs. Chen for. But Emma hated ballet. She hated the pink tights that itched, the leotard that was too tight, the ballet shoes that hurt her feet. She hated the way Miss Patricia clapped her hands sharply and called out corrections in a voice that made Emma feel small and stupid. She hated standing at the bar while the other girls with mothers who came to every recital, who waited in the parent viewing area instead of paying someone else to watch, executed perfect movements that Emma could never quite master. So Emma had learned to slip away. It was easy. Mrs. Chen was 67 years old and her knees hurt. She didn't follow Emma into the studio, just deposited her at the door and went to sit with the other caregivers, drinking tea and talking about their employers in Cantonese, thinking none of the children understood. Emma would put on her ballet clothes, attend the first 15 minutes of class, then excuse herself to use the bathroom. Instead of going to the bathroom, she'd slip out the side door, walk 3 blocks to the subway station, and ride back to Harrison Technologies. She had her mother's building access card. Victoria had given it to her months ago, saying, "Just in case of emergencies, baby," and she knew the security guards. They waved her through without question. Then Emma would ride the elevator down to the basement levels, to the maintenance corridors where the fluorescent lights flickered and the air smelled like cleaning chemicals and concrete. And she'd find her favorite person in the whole building. "Mr. Benjamin," she'd call, her voice echoing through the empty hallways. Benjamin would look up from whatever he was cleaning, a floor, a window, a spill that someone had left for him to deal with, and shake his head. But there was always a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth, just barely visible if you knew to look for it. "You're supposed to be at ballet," he'd say, his voice rough from disuse. "Ballet is boring," Emma would reply, settling herself on an upturned bucket or a stack of boxes. "You're much more interesting." And she'd talk while he worked, about school, about the kids in her class who were mean sometimes but mostly okay, about her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who was nice and let Emma read ahead in the reading book when she finished her work early, about the books she was reading, currently the entire Chronicles of Narnia series, which she'd discovered in the library and was devouring one after another. She told Benjamin things she didn't tell her mother, about how lonely she felt in her mother's big office, sitting in the corner with her coloring books, while Victoria talked on the phone in voices Emma didn't quite understand. sharp and professional, so different from the soft voice her mother used when they were alone, about how she missed her dad, even though he never called anymore, even though he'd promised he would, about how sometimes she was scared when her mother worked late, scared that something bad would happen and she'd be all alone. Benjamin listened. He never interrupted, never told her she was being silly or that everything would be fine, never gave advice she didn't ask for. He just listened, his hands moving steadily through whatever task he was doing, occasionally nodding to show he'd heard. And sometimes, when Emma asked, he taught her things, small things. How to tie a proper square knot that wouldn't slip. How to tell if fruit was ripe by pressing gently on the skin. How to whistle through your fingers, which took Emma 3 weeks to master but finally worked, much to Mrs. Chen's dismay when Emma started practicing it at home. Other employees didn't understand why the CEO's daughter spent time with the janitor. Some of them whispered about it in break rooms, thinking Emma couldn't hear, said it was inappropriate, said someone should tell Mrs. Harrison, said it was weird that a grown man would want to spend time with a 6-year-old girl who wasn't his daughter. Victoria noticed the whispers. She heard the gossip, but she never stopped it, because she'd seen the way Emma smiled when she talked about Mr. Benjamin, seen the way her daughter's face lit up when she told Victoria about something new he'd taught her, and Victoria had made inquiries, quietly, through her security team. They'd told her Benjamin Carter had a spotless record, no criminal history, no complaints, no red flags, just a quiet man who did his job and kept to himself. There was something gentle in Benjamin's silence, something that made Victoria trust him, even though she knew almost nothing about the man. Some instinct that told her Emma was safe with him, that he'd never hurt her daughter. So she let it continue, because Emma needed someone, and if that someone was a janitor who listened when no one else did, then that was fine with Victoria. The attack happened on a Thursday evening in late October. Victoria stayed late at the office, like she did most Thursday nights. Emma had ballet, or at least Victoria thought Emma had ballet, and Mrs. Chen would bring her back to the office around 7. That gave Victoria 2 uninterrupted hours to work without guilt, without feeling like she should be spending time with her daughter instead of reviewing contracts and financial statements. That night, Victoria was in her 20th floor office, the lights of Boston spread out below her like a field of stars. Her desk was covered with documents, printouts of bank statements, transaction logs, emails she'd retrieved from the server, months of evidence, carefully compiled, meticulously organized. The numbers told a story of systematic embezzlement going back at least 2 years, possibly longer. Millions of dollars siphoned through shell companies and fake vendors, invoices for services never rendered, payments to consultants who didn't exist. Money moving through Harrison Tech's accounts like blood through a body, except someone had opened a vein and was slowly draining the company dry. And Marcus Reynolds' signature was on half the authorizations, his email on a third of the communications, his fingerprints all over the fraud. Victoria's hands shook slightly as she organized the documents into presentation folders. Tomorrow morning, she'd scheduled an emergency board meeting, 8 o'clock sharp. She was going to lay it all out. The evidence, the money trail, the scope of the theft. And then she was going to demand Marcus Reynolds' immediate termination and recommend criminal prosecution. It would destroy him, end his career, probably put him in prison for 10 to 15 years. But he'd stolen from her father's company, from her company, from the employees who depended on Harrison Tech for their livelihoods. He'd betrayed 15 years of friendship, and Victoria couldn't let that stand. At 10:30 p.m., she gathered the last of the documents into her briefcase, a leather attaché case her father had given her when she made VP with her initials embossed in gold, and sent a quick text to Mrs. Chen downstairs. Coming down now, 5 minutes. Emma would be waiting in the executive lobby play area, probably asleep on the couch. Mrs. Chen would have a book, reading quietly while she waited. They'd drive home together, and Victoria would carry Emma up to bed, and tomorrow would be the day that changed everything. Victoria headed to the elevator and pressed the button for parking level 2, where she kept her reserved spot. The executive parking, close to the elevator, well lit and supposedly secure. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. 20 floors, descending through the building's core. The numbers ticked down on the digital display. 15, 10, 5, P1, P2. The doors opened with a soft chime. The parking garage was dimly lit despite the supposedly bright security lights. Shadows gathered between the concrete pillars that held up 30 stories of building. The air smelled like exhaust and oil, underlaid with something damp and musty. Victoria's heels clicked sharply on the concrete floor as she walked toward her car. A silver BMW parked in spot A7, the spot that had been her father's. Every step echoed in the cavernous space. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the hum of the ventilation system, the drip of water from a leaking pipe. She was thinking about tomorrow's board meeting, about the look that would be on Marcus's face when she revealed what she'd found, about how to handle the media fallout when this became public, because something this big always became public, about Emma, and how to explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes people you trust do terrible things. She didn't hear them coming until it was too late. 2 men in ski masks stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, moving fast. Victoria tried to run, her brain finally catching up to the danger. But the first man grabbed her arm and yanked her backward with brutal force. She stumbled, her heel catching, and fell hard onto one knee. Her briefcase flew from her hand, hit the concrete with a loud crack, and burst open. Documents scattered everywhere. White pages against gray concrete, months of evidence spreading across the parking garage like snow. Where are the files? The voice was muffled by the mask, but still familiar. Deep, masculine, someone she knew. I don't know what you're... Victoria tried to stand, tried to think, but her mind was blank with panic. His fist hit her stomach. Hard, professional, the kind of punch that drives all the air from your lungs and leaves you gasping, unable to breathe, unable to scream. Victoria doubled over, her vision graying at the edges. Strong hands grabbed her, the second man, and shoved her hard against a concrete pillar. Her head cracked against the unforgiving surface. Pain exploded through her skull, white-hot and blinding. Blood, warm and wet, ran down the back of her neck. "The backups," the first man said, his voice calm, businesslike. "Where are the backups?" Victoria's vision was blurring. She tried to focus, tried to think, but her thoughts were fragmenting. She tasted blood in her mouth, felt it running down her face. Her left arm hung at a wrong angle, bent where it shouldn't bend. Broken. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. One of them, she couldn't tell which anymore, couldn't focus, raised his, hand to strike again. "Someone's coming," hissed the second man. "Footsteps. We gotta go now." "Where are the..." "Now! Someone's coming!" They released her. Victoria's legs wouldn't hold her weight. She slid down the concrete pillar, her back scraping against the rough surface, and crumpled onto the cold floor. She heard running footsteps, heavy boots on concrete, car doors slamming. 1, 2, an engine roaring to life, tires squealing as they accelerated up the exit ramp. Then silence. Victoria lay on the concrete, documents scattered around her like the broken pieces of her life. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. Tried to call for help, but her voice was gone. Darkness was creeping in from the edges of her vision, threatening to pull her under. She had to stay conscious, had to stay awake. For Emma, her daughter needed her. Emma was upstairs waiting, and if Victoria passed out now, if she let the darkness take her, who would take care of Emma? She focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. Each breath was agony, ribs screaming in protest, but she kept breathing, kept fighting, kept holding on. Just a little longer. Help was coming. It had to be coming. Just a little longer. Upstairs in the executive lobby, Mrs. Chen checked her watch for the third time. 10:45 p.m. Mrs. Harrison had texted at 10:30. "Coming down now." 5 minutes. 15 minutes had passed. Mrs. Chen tried calling Victoria's cell phone. It rang 6 times, then went to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. A third time. Nothing. Something was wrong. "Emma, honey," Mrs. Chen said gently, touching the little girl's shoulder. Emma had been asleep on the couch, curled up with her backpack as a pillow. She stirred, blinking sleepily. "Let's go check on your mom. Stay close to me, okay?" "Is Mommy okay?" Emma asked, still half asleep. "I'm sure she's fine, baby. She's probably just talking to someone. But let's go make sure." They rode the elevator down. Mrs. Chen's heart was beating too. Fast, her hands clammy with sudden fear. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Mrs. Harrison was fine. She'd probably run into an employee, was having a conversation, lost track of time. Everything was fine. But Mrs. Chen had lived through the Cultural Revolution. She'd learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. The elevator doors opened on parking level 2. The garage was darker than Mrs. Chen remembered, shadows everywhere. She stepped out cautiously, Emma's hand clutched tight in hers. "Mrs. Harrison!" she called out. Her voice echoed back to her from the concrete walls. "Mrs. Harrison!" A weak moan came from somewhere ahead, barely audible, more felt than heard. "Stay behind me," Mrs. Chen whispered, pulling Emma close. They walked forward slowly. Mrs. Chen's eyes adjusted to the dim light. She saw the BMW in spot A7, saw the scattered papers everywhere, saw, "Mommy!" Emma had seen her first. She tried to run forward, but Mrs. Chen held her back, her grip tight enough to bruise. Victoria Harrison lay crumpled on the concrete about 15 feet from her car. Her face was swollen and bruised, already turning purple. Her left arm was bent at an angle that made Mrs. Chen's stomach turn. Blood matted her hair, ran down her face, pooled on the concrete beneath her head. Papers were scattered everywhere, dozens of white pages marked with numbers and signatures and official stamps. "Oh God," Mrs. Chen whispered. "Oh God." "Mrs. Harrison!" She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, nearly dropping it. Dialed 911, put it on speaker. 911, what's your emergency?" "I need an ambulance," Mrs. Chen said, trying to keep her voice steady for Emma's sake. "Harrison Technologies, parking level 2. A woman has been attacked. She's unconscious. There's blood. A lot of blood. Ma'am, I'm dispatching an ambulance now. Is the victim breathing?" Mrs. Chen knelt beside Victoria. Emma still clutched to her side. She put her hand near Victoria's mouth and felt weak breath, shallow but present. "Yes, she's breathing, but she won't wake up. Her arm is broken, I think. Her head is bleeding." "Don't move her," the dispatcher said. "The ambulance is en route. Stay on the line with me. Are you safe? Is the attacker still there?" I don't think so. I don't see anyone. Stay on the line. Help is coming." But Emma had pulled away from Mrs. Chen's grip. She stood staring at her mother, her little face pale, eyes wide with shock. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she made no sound, just stared. "Emma, honey, come back here. Don't touch her. We need to wait for the ambulance." But Emma shook her head. "We need Mr. Benjamin," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. "He can help. He knows how to fix things." "Emma, the ambulance is coming." "We need Mr. Benjamin." Emma's voice rose, becoming shrill with panic. "He's upstairs. He can help Mommy right now. The ambulance will take too long." She pulled free from Mrs. Chen's grasp and ran. "Emma, wait!" But the little girl was already running back toward the elevator, her feet slapping against the concrete, her white dress flying behind her like a flag. Mrs. Chen stayed with Victoria, her hand hovering over the phone, torn between chasing Emma and staying with the injured woman. She chose to stay, knelt beside Victoria and checked her pulse with trembling fingers. Thready, too fast, but present. "Hold on," Mrs. Chen whispered, though she didn't know if Victoria could hear her. "Help is coming, just hold on!" Emma burst back into the lobby like a hurricane, her heart pounding so hard it hurt, her breath coming in gasps. She looked around wildly, panic making everything sharp and too bright. She saw him, Mr. Benjamin, by the front doors, emptying a trash can into a larger bin, moving slowly, methodically, like he always did, like it was just another normal night. Emma ran straight to him. Her legs felt like rubber, shaking so hard she almost fell. She grabbed his gray uniform with both hands, clutching the fabric so tight her knuckles turned white. "Mr. Benjamin," the words came out as a sob, her voice breaking. "My mom, she's down there in the garage and she's really hurt, and she won't wake up, and there's blood. And Mrs. Chen called the ambulance, but it's taking too long, and you have to help her. You have to help her right now, please." The words tumbled out in a rush, barely coherent, but Benjamin understood. His hands came up to her, shoulders steady and warm, grounding her. "Slow down," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "Where is she?" "The garage. Level 2. Mrs. Chen is with her, but Emma's voice broke again, fresh tears spilling down her face. Please, Mr. Benjamin, she needs help now. The security guard at the front desk had heard the commotion. He came around quickly, radio already in his hand. I called 911. Ambulance should be here in about 6 minutes. 6 minutes might be too long, Benjamin said quietly. But something had changed in his voice. It was sharper now, harder. The voice of someone who'd given orders in situations where seconds meant the difference between life and death. He looked down at Emma. Take me to her. Right now. Can you do that? Emma nodded frantically, already pulling him toward the elevator. Sir, should I? The security guard started. Call 911 back, Benjamin said over his shoulder, already moving. Tell them we have a trauma patient. Possible head injury, loss of consciousness. Tell them to have a trauma team on standby. But how do you? Benjamin and Emma were already in the elevator. The doors slid shut. In those 30 seconds, as the elevator descended, Benjamin's mind switched into a mode he'd locked away years ago. It was like muscle memory, something you could suppress but never truly forget. Combat medicine, trauma response, battlefield surgery. His brain was already calculating. Adult female, based on Emma's description. Unconscious, meaning at least a moderate head injury, possibly severe. Blood, which could mean anything from a scalp laceration, bleeds a lot but not usually life-threatening, to a skull fracture with intracranial bleeding. Arm injury, possibly broken. 6 minutes for an ambulance to arrive, plus however long it took them to get down to parking level 2. 6 minutes could mean the difference between life and death if there was arterial bleeding or airway compromise. 6 minutes was an eternity in trauma medicine. The call. Elevator chimed. P2. The doors opened. Benjamin stepped out and immediately assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who'd walked into war zones. Mrs. Chen kneeling beside a woman lying on concrete. Scattered papers everywhere. Documents of some kind. Official looking. No visible attackers. No ongoing threat. Scene secure. He moved quickly to Victoria's side, his shoes making no sound on the concrete. Mrs. Chen looked up, her face streaked with tears. Thank God you're here. I don't know what to do. She won't wake up. Benjamin was already kneeling, his hands moving with clinical precision. Unconscious, he said, his voice flat, professional. Breathing shallow but present. Airway clear. His hands moved to her neck, checking carefully. Cervical spine stable. Pulse rapid, thready. Approximately 110 beats per minute. He moved his assessment to her head. Significant facial trauma, swelling, contusions, likely fractures. Scalp laceration bleeding actively. He pressed gently on her skull, feeling for depressions or instability. Found a hematoma forming at the back of her head where she'd hit the concrete pillar. Significant head trauma, he continued, still in that flat, clinical voice. Probable concussion, possible skull fracture, left arm fractured, displaced, multiple contusions, abdomen rigid, probable internal bleeding. Mrs. Chen was staring at him with her mouth open. You're a janitor, she said weakly. Call 911 again, Benjamin said, not looking at her. Tell them we have a trauma patient. Adult female, age approximately 35. Unconscious. GCS approximately 8. Significant head injury with active bleeding. Suspected fractured left radius. Possible fractured ulna. Rigid abdomen suggesting internal injuries. Possible fractured ribs. Victim of assault. Tell them we need a trauma team on standby. Level 1 trauma activation. Do it now. Mrs. Chen fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Benjamin was already moving. He took off his gray janitor's jacket, revealing something unexpected underneath. Strapped across his chest was a worn canvas bag, olive drab, military style. He opened it with practiced efficiency that spoke of years of repetition. Inside were medical supplies that had no business being in a janitor's possession. Sterile gauze packs, hemostatic agents designed to stop severe bleeding, a collapsible cervical collar, surgical tape, trauma shears, a compact emergency medical kit that any combat medic would recognize immediately as military-issue field equipment. Emma stood about 10 feet away, frozen, watching with frightened eyes. Benjamin glanced at her. Emma, he said gently, his voice softening just for her. I need you to be very brave for your mom right now. Can you do that for me? Emma nodded, her whole body trembling. "Good girl. I need you to stay right there and talk to her. Even though she can't answer, she might be able to hear you. Tell her you're here. Tell her she's going to be okay. Can you do that?" Emma nodded again and scooted closer, kneeling on the concrete. She reached out and took her mother's hand, the right one, since the left was clearly broken. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "It's me. It's Emma. Mr. Benjamin is here. He's going to help you. You're going to be okay. Please, be okay." Benjamin worked with swift, precise efficiency. Every movement was economical, practiced, the result of years of training that had been reinforced under the worst possible conditions. He packed the scalp wound with hemostatic gauze, applying pressure to control the bleeding. The wound was deep, but head wounds always bled more than they looked. He'd seen worse in the field, much worse. He carefully applied the cervical collar, stabilizing her neck in case there was spinal damage. Better safe than sorry. One wrong move could turn a bad injury into a catastrophic one. He checked her pupils with a small penlight from his kit. Right pupil responding normally. Left pupil slightly dilated, sluggish response. Not good, but not immediately life-threatening. Suggested increased intracranial pressure, but manageable if they got her to a hospital quickly. He checked her pulse again. Still thready, still fast, about 110 beats per minute. Her body was compensating for blood loss, trying to maintain pressure to her vital organs. He had to keep her stable until the paramedics arrived. He assessed her abdomen, pressing gently in quadrants. She flinched, even unconscious. A bad sign. The abdomen was rigid, tight as a drum. Definite internal bleeding, probably from liver or spleen damage. He couldn't do anything about that here. That needed surgery, needed a hospital. But he could keep her stable, could give her a fighting chance. He carefully palpated her left arm. Both radius and ulna fractured, displaced. He could feel the broken ends of bone grinding together. He immobilized it with a makeshift splint. 2 pieces of cardboard from a box he found nearby, secured with medical tape from his kit. Not perfect, but it would do until the paramedics got here. He checked her ribs. At least 3 fractured on the left side, possibly more. Breathing was shallow because every breath hurt, even unconscious. He had to make sure she kept breathing, that a fractured rib didn't puncture a lung. He positioned her carefully in the recovery position, on her side, head tilted back slightly to keep her airway clear. If she vomited, this position would prevent her from aspirating. He placed his jacket over her to prevent shock, preserve body heat. Every movement was precise. Every decision was based on years of training, thousands of hours of practice, countless trauma cases in conditions far worse than a parking garage in Boston. His hands remembered, even though he'd tried to forget. His mind knew what to do, even though he'd spent 3 years pretending he didn't. 4 minutes had passed since Emma had found him. In the distance, sirens wailed, getting closer. 2 minutes later, paramedics rushed in with equipment and a stretcher. A woman in her mid-40s, clearly the senior paramedic, took one look at the scene, and her eyebrows rose sharply. "Who did the first aid?" she demanded, already kneeling beside Victoria, her hands beginning their own assessment. "I did," Benjamin said, stepping back to give them room. The paramedic's hands moved quickly, professionally, checking everything Benjamin had done. Checking the collar placement, the wound packing, the splint, the positioning. Her expression went from skeptical to impressed to shocked. "Cervical collar properly applied," she said, half to herself, half to her partner. "Head wound packed with hemostatic agents. Proper pressure, proper placement. Arm immobilized. Patient positioned to protect airway. Vitals monitored." She looked up at Benjamin. "You kept her alive. Another 5 minutes without intervention and she'd have gone into shock." She studied him more closely. "Military?" Benjamin didn't answer. Just stepped back further, making room. "Get her loaded," the lead paramedic said to her team. "We're running hot to Mass General. Radio ahead, level 1 trauma activation. Head injury, internal bleeding, possible spinal involvement. Get a neurosurgeon on standby." As they loaded Victoria onto the stretcher, working with practiced efficiency, the lead paramedic turned back to Benjamin. "Seriously," she said. "Who are you?" That was textbook battlefield medicine. I've seen military medics with less skill. "Just someone who knew what to do," Benjamin said quietly. A Boston police officer had arrived with the ambulance. He was already taking out his notebook, looking around at the scene, the scattered papers, the blood on the concrete, the signs of a struggle. "I need statements from everyone," he said. "Starting with you, sir. Name? Benjamin Carter. I work here as a janitor." The officer's pen stopped moving. He looked at, the medical equipment scattered on the ground, then at Benjamin, then back at the equipment. "You're a janitor," he said slowly. "Who carries a military trauma kit and knows how to perform battlefield medicine?" "I have first aid training from my time in the service," Benjamin said. "I was nearby when the child came for help. I assessed the victim and stabilized her until the paramedics arrived. That's all." The officer studied him for a long moment. "I'm going to need a lot more than that." But Benjamin was already moving toward the elevator. Emma was crying, being held by Mrs. Chen, and he wanted to make sure she was okay before he disappeared. "Sir, I need you to stay here for questioning." "You have my name," Benjamin said over his shoulder. "I work here. You can find me if you need me." He knelt beside Emma. "Hey," he said gently, "your mom is going to be okay. Those paramedics are really good at their job and she's going to get the best care. You were so brave. You helped save her life." Emma threw her arms around his neck, sobbing. Benjamin hesitated, then hugged her back, one hand patting her back gently. "I was so scared," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "I know, but you did exactly the right thing. You found help. That's the most important thing you could have done." He pulled back, looked into her teary eyes. "Mrs. Chen is going to take you to the hospital now, okay? And I promise you, your mom is going to be fine." He couldn't really promise that. He'd seen too much to make promises about trauma patients. But Emma needed to hear it, needed something to hold on to. And sometimes a comforting lie was kinder than an honest maybe. The officer was approaching again. Benjamin stood up quickly. "I need to go," he said to Mrs. Chen. "Take care of her." "But," Mrs. Chen started. Benjamin was already walking away, heading for the elevator. The officer called after him, but Benjamin kept walking. He'd given his name. They'd find him tomorrow if they really needed him. But right now, he needed to disappear before someone started asking questions he couldn't answer. Questions about why a janitor had military medical training. Questions about who he really was. Questions about the past he'd spent 3 years running from. The elevator doors closed behind him, and Benjamin Carter became invisible again. Victoria Harrison woke in a hospital room to the sound of machines beeping rhythmically. Her head felt like someone had split it open with an axe. Her left arm throbbed with a deep, bone-deep pain that made her nauseous. Every breath hurt, sharp pains stabbing through her chest like knives. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. Everything hurt. Everything. "Mom." A small voice, thick with relief and exhaustion. Victoria slowly, carefully turned her head. The room swam, her vision doubling for a moment before resolving. Emma sat in a chair beside the hospital bed, her small hand holding Victoria's right hand. Mrs. Chen stood behind her. "Sweetheart," Victoria whispered. Her throat was raw, her voice barely audible. What happened?" The memories were fragmented. The garage, the men in masks, the pain, then nothing. Just darkness. "How?" Her voice broke. "How did I get here?" "Mr. Benjamin saved you," Emma said, her words tumbling out fast. "I ran and found him and he came down to the garage and he had all these medical things in a bag and he knew exactly what to do and the ambulance people said you would have died if he hadn't helped you and—" "Slow down, baby," Victoria whispered. Her head was pounding. "Mr. Benjamin, the janitor." Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "It's true, Mrs. Harrison. That man, Benjamin Carter, he treated you like a military field medic. He had equipment, real medical equipment. He stabilized you, stopped the bleeding, immobilized your injuries. The paramedic said his work was perfect, said he kept you alive." Victoria tried to process this. The quiet janitor, the man who mopped floors and emptied trash cans, had saved her life. Where is he?" "He left," Mrs. Chen said. "After the ambulance took you. The police wanted to question him, but he left. Said they could find him at work if they needed him." A nurse came in, checking the monitors, adjusting IV lines. She was young, efficient, professional. "You're awake," she said with a warm smile. "Good. How's your pain level? 1 to 10? 8, Victoria managed. "I'll get you something for that." The nurse made a Notes on a tablet. You're a very lucky woman, Mrs. Harrison. You have a concussion, 3 broken ribs, a broken left arm, both radius and ulnar, and significant internal bruising. You lost a fair amount of blood, but you're going to be fine. How long? You've been unconscious for about 8 hours. It's Friday morning now. Your daughter and Mrs. Chen have been here all night. 8 hours. Victoria had lost 8 hours. What else had she lost? The documents, she said suddenly, trying to sit up. Pain exploded through her ribs and she gasped, falling back. Don't move, the nurse said sharply. You'll tear your stitches. The documents, in the garage. The police have them, a new voice said from the doorway. A man in his 50s stepped into the room. Gray suit, conservative tie, tired eyes that had seen too much. He held up a badge. Mrs. Harrison, I'm Detective Morris, Boston PD. I need to ask you some questions when you're feeling up to it. Victoria nodded slightly, immediately, regretting it as pain spiked through her skull. Morris pulled up a chair. Do you remember anything about your attackers? 2 men, ski masks. Victoria's voice was getting stronger, though it still hurt to talk. But one of them, his voice, I think it was Marcus Reynolds. Morris's pen paused. Your CFO? You're sure? Pretty sure. And there was another man, younger voice. Might have been James Mitchell. He works in Marcus's department as his assistant. What did they want? They asked about files, backups. I've been investigating embezzlement. Marcus Reynolds has been stealing from the company for at least 2 years. I found evidence, millions of dollars siphoned through shell companies. I was going to present it at a board meeting this morning. Victoria's voice hardened despite the pain. They tried to kill me to keep me quiet. Morris was writing quickly. We need those files. They're scattered in the garage, and I have backups. Everything is backed up on a secure server. Encrypted. The access codes are in my desk drawer at the office in a sealed envelope. We'll retrieve them, Morris said. Mrs. Harrison, this is now an attempted murder investigation in addition to assault and embezzlement. We're taking this very seriously. What about the attackers? Not yet, but we have security footage showing 2 men fleeing the scene at 10:38 p.m. We're reviewing all footage from the building. We'll find them. Morris flipped through his notes. Now, about Benjamin Carter, the janitor who saved your life. We tried to get his statement last night, but he left before we could interview him properly. How much do you know about him? Victoria shook her head slightly, then wished she hadn't. Almost nothing. He's worked at Harrison Tech for about 3 years. Very quiet. Keeps to himself. My daughter likes him. Your daughter says he's her friend. Says he teaches her things. Spends time with her. He's never inappropriate, Victoria said quickly, defensive. Emma's lonely. She goes looking for him. He's kind to her, that's all. Morris studied her. Mrs. Harrison, janitors don't usually carry military trauma kits and perform battlefield medicine. We ran his prints from the items he left behind, the medical supplies. Victoria waited. Captain Benjamin Carter, United States Army Medical Corps. 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Decorated trauma surgeon. 27 confirmed saves under direct fire. One of the best battlefield doctors in his unit. Morris paused. Honorable discharge 8 years ago. After that, nothing. No medical practice, no license renewals, nothing. Until he showed up at your company 3 years ago as a janitor. Using his real name, but nobody bothered to check his background beyond a basic criminal history search. Victoria's mind was reeling. A decorated military surgeon, working as a janitor. It made no sense. Why? She whispered. That's what I'd like to know, Morris said. I'd also like to know why he still carries field medical equipment after being out of the military for 8 years, and why he left before giving a full statement. Maybe he didn't want attention, Mrs. Chen offered from the corner. Some heroes don't like being called heroes. Morris stood up. Mrs. Harrison, we're going to need to interview Mr. Carter properly. If you hear from him before we do, please let us know. After Morris left, Victoria lay back against the pillows, her mind working despite the pain and exhaustion. Benjamin Carter, surgeon, war hero, janitor. What could drive a man from saving lives on the battlefield to mopping floors in anonymity? And why was he still carrying the tools of his old life, like he was waiting for someone to need saving? Over the next 3 days, Victoria slowly recovered in the hospital, while the world moved on without her. She learned that Marcus Reynolds had been arrested trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands, with 2 suitcases full of cash. James I. Mitchell had turned himself in, cooperating fully with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. The FBI executed search warrants on Marcus's home and office, uncovering evidence of systematic embezzlement going back 3 years, not 2 as Victoria had thought. $17 million stolen through fake vendors and shell companies. Marcus had been bleeding Harrison Tech dry since before Victoria's father died, maybe even contributing to the stress that caused his heart attack. The board of directors was in crisis mode. Shareholders were panicking, stock prices were plummeting. Victoria needed to be there, needed to lead the company through this crisis, but she could barely stand up without help. And through it all, she kept thinking about Benjamin Carter. The hospital staff told her he'd called twice, not to speak to her but to check on her condition. Anonymous calls asking if Victoria Harrison was recovering. When the nurses asked who was calling, he'd hung up. On the 4th day, Victoria's security chief came to visit. "We found him," he said simply. "Benjamin Carter?" "Yes, ma'am. You're not going to like where." He handed her a folder. Inside were surveillance photos of Benjamin at a rundown community center in one of Boston's worst neighborhoods. In the photos, he was surrounded by teenagers, rough-looking kids in gang colors and worn-out clothes, but they were all watching him intently as he demonstrated something with his hands. What's he doing? Teaching. First aid. Apparently he volunteers there 3 evenings a week. Has been for years. Teaches street kids, homeless folks, anyone who wants to learn. Basic trauma care, wound treatment, CPR. Victoria stared at the photos. "Why?" I asked around. "The people at the center say he's been coming since before he started working for you. They say he's saved lives, treated overdoses, knife wounds, beaten up kids who can't go to the hospital because they're afraid of police or don't have insurance. They say he's like a guardian angel who mopped floors for a living." "I want to see him," Victoria said. "Ma'am, you're still recovering. I don't care. I want to see him. Today." Her security chief knew better than to argue with Victoria Harrison when she used that tone. They found Benjamin at the community center that evening. It was in a converted warehouse in Roxbury, the kind of neighborhood where police patrols came in pairs and nobody went out alone after dark. The building was old, paint peeling, windows covered with bars. Inside, it was drafty and cold, with donated furniture and outdated equipment, but it was clean, clearly well-maintained despite its age, loved, even if it was falling apart. Victoria arrived with her security chief and Mrs. Chen, who insisted on coming because Victoria was still weak and dizzy and in no condition to be wandering around dangerous neighborhoods. Emma had wanted to come too, but Victoria had left her with a trusted babysitter. This conversation wasn't for 6-year-old ears. They found Benjamin in a large room that might once have been a loading dock. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. About 15 people sat on folding chairs in a semicircle around him, mostly teenagers, a few older folks, all of them looking tired and worn out by life. Benjamin was demonstrating CPR on a training dummy, his hands moving with practiced precision. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, he was saying. Count them out in now. Your head. 1, 2, 3. You need to press hard. Hard enough to compress the chest about 2 inches. Don't be afraid of breaking ribs. Better a broken rib than dead. If you're not pressing hard enough, you're not doing any good. One of the teenagers, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, with poorly done tattoos on her arms and a fading black eye, raised her hand. What if they're still breathing but unconscious? Recovery position, Benjamin said. He moved the dummy onto its oars, sighed, tilted the head back slightly. This keeps the airway clear. If they vomit, it won't go into their lungs. Stay with them. Call 911. Don't leave them alone. What if you can't call 911? Another kid asked. A boy with gang colors and a scar across his cheek. Benjamin met his eyes. Then you do the best you can with what you have. Keep them breathing. Stop any bleeding. Keep them warm. And get them to help as soon as you can. However you can. He said it without judgment, without questions. These kids had reasons for not calling 911. Warrants, immigration status, fear of police, fear of showing weakness in front of gang rivals. Benjamin didn't need to know the reasons. He just needed them to survive. Victoria stood in the doorway, her broken arm in a sling, leaning heavily on Mrs. Chen. Benjamin hadn't noticed her yet. He was focused entirely on his students, patient and thorough. Let's practice, he said. Everyone pair up. Take turns. I'll come around and check your form. The fa. Group dispersed, pairing off. Benjamin moved among them, correcting hand placement, adjusting compression depth, offering quiet encouragement. That's when he saw Victoria. He froze mid-step, his expression unreadable. Then something like resignation crossed his face. He'd known this was coming, known she'd find him eventually. He said something to his students. Victoria couldn't hear what, and walked over to her. You should still be in the hospital, he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. I needed to see you, Victoria replied. To thank you. You saved my life. I just did what anyone with training would do. No, Victoria shook her head, immediately regretting it as dizziness washed over her. Most people would have waited for the ambulance. Most people don't carry military trauma kits in case someone needs help. Most people wouldn't have known what to do. Benjamin didn't respond, just stood there, waiting for her to say whatever she'd come to say so he could go back to his anonymous life. Detective Morris told me about your background, Victoria continued. Captain Benjamin Carter, decorated surgeon, war hero. Benjamin's jaw tightened. That's in the past. Doesn't matter now. It matters to me. My daughter says you're her favorite person in the building. She talks about you constantly. I've been letting a complete stranger spend time with my daughter, and I didn't even know who you really were. I never hurt her. Never would. I know that. Victoria's voice softened. But I don't understand. Why is a trained surgeon working as a janitor? Why are you here? She gestured at the dilapidated community center, teaching street kids first aid instead of practicing medicine. Because I can't practice medicine anymore, Benjamin said, his voice still flat. I'm not licensed. I let it lapse. Why? He didn't answer, just looked at her with those expressionless eyes, giving nothing away. Please, Victoria said. I need to understand. You saved my life when you had nothing to gain, when you could have just walked away. Why? Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Your daughter grabbed my hand and begged me to help. She looked terrified. I couldn't. His voice caught, just barely. I couldn't let her watch her mother die. Not like that. But you could have called 911 and waited. You didn't have to. 6 minutes, Benjamin interrupted. The ambulance was 6 minutes away. With head trauma and probable internal bleeding, 6 minutes could have been too long. I had the training. I had the equipment. I couldn't stand there and do nothing. You said you let your medical license lapse. When? 8 years ago. Why? His expression closed off completely. That's not your business. You made it my business when you saved my life with skills you supposedly don't use anymore. When you became important to my daughter. I lost someone, Benjamin said abruptly, cutting her off. Someone I couldn't save. After that, I can't. He stopped, his jaw working like he was physically fighting to keep words inside. Victoria waited, let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence was the best question. Her name was Sarah, Benjamin finally said, his voice barely audible. My wife. She was a nurse. We worked together in Afghanistan. She volunteered for a supply convoy to a rural clinic. I was scheduled for surgery. Couldn't go. The convoy hit an IED. She died instantly. Victoria's breath caught. I'm so sorry. I worked 18 hours straight that day, Benjamin continued, his voice hollow now, like he was reciting facts that had nothing to do with him. Trying to save the survivors they brought back. Saved 11 people, but Sarah was already gone. There was nothing I could do. He looked at Victoria then, really looked at her, and she saw the grief in his eyes, raw and terrible even after 8 years. I'm a surgeon, he said. I was supposed to save people. That's what I was trained for, what I was good at. But I couldn't save her. Couldn't save the one person who mattered most. What kind of surgeon can't save his own wife? You weren't there, Victoria said gently. You couldn't have. That's the point. Benjamin's voice rose slightly, anger finally breaking through the flat affect. I wasn't there. I let her go on that convoy. We'd argued about it that morning. I told her it was too dangerous. She said people needed help. That's why we were there. I could have refused to let her go. Could have insisted. Could have. He stopped, taking a breath, forcing himself back under control. After that, I finished my tour. Got my honorable discharge. Let my license lapse. Because what right did I have to save strangers when I couldn't save her? What right did I have to practice medicine when I'd failed the only patient that mattered? The words hung in the cold air of the community center. Behind them, Benjamin's students continued practicing CPR, their voices a distant murmur. "So you became a janitor," Victoria said quietly, "because you thought you didn't deserve to be a doctor anymore. I became someone who couldn't fail anyone important, who couldn't be responsible for life and death decisions, who couldn't—" He stopped. "I found work where I couldn't hurt anyone. But you still carry your medical kit. You still volunteer here, teaching people how to save lives. You still save people, like you saved me. That doesn't sound like someone who gave up medicine. That sounds like someone who's still a doctor, even if he won't admit it." Benjamin shook his head. "I'm not a doctor. I clean floors. That's all." "Then why did you save me? Why risk exposing who you really are?" "Because—" Benjamin's voice caught again. "Because your daughter looked at me with those terrified eyes and begged me to help, and I couldn't let her feel what I felt. Couldn't let her lose her mother if there was anything I could do to prevent it. I couldn't save Sarah. But I could save you. I had to save you." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being there, for knowing what to do, for not giving up on me." Benjamin looked away. "You should go. You're still recovering. You shouldn't be in this neighborhood. I came to thank you and to offer you something. I don't want anything. Just hear me out," Victoria said. "I want to start a community health initiative. Free medical care for people who can't afford it. Trauma response training, mental health support, a clinic right here in this neighborhood where people who need help can get it without fear." Benjamin's expression didn't change. "That's ambitious. I can afford it. My father always said business should serve the community, not just shareholders. After what happened to me, I realize how lucky I am. Most people don't have the resources I have. Most people suffer alone. That's a good idea. You should do it. I want you to run it." The words hung in the air between them. Benjamin stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "No," he said flatly. "That's impossible." "Why? I let my license lapse 8 years ago. I haven't practiced medicine since then. I'm not—" "You saved my life with a field kit in 15 minutes, Victoria interrupted. "You volunteer here teaching at-risk youth life-saving skills. You still carry medical equipment everywhere you go in case someone needs help. You're still a doctor, Benjamin. You just need to admit it. I can't go back to that. Every time I think about practicing medicine again, I see Sarah's face. I see everyone I couldn't save, every patient who died on my table, every person I failed." Victoria took a step closer, wincing at the pain, but refusing to back down. "What would Sarah want? Would she want you hiding, punishing yourself? Or would she want you doing what you were meant to do, saving lives?" Benjamin's face twisted with grief and anger. "Don't talk about her like you knew her. You're right. I didn't know her, but I know she was a nurse. I know she volunteered for that convoy because she believed in helping people. I know she chose to be with you. A surgeon, a healer. She loved you for who you were." Victoria's voice softened. "Do you really think she'd want you to give up who you are because you couldn't save her? Or would she want you to honor her memory by continuing to do what you both believed in?" Benjamin turned away. His shoulders were shaking slightly. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can do it again. What if I fail? What if someone dies because I'm not good enough? Then you'll have done everything you could, and that's all anyone can ask. You'll fail sometimes. Every doctor does. But you'll also save people. You'll make a difference, just like you did with me." Benjamin was quiet for a long time. Victoria waited, giving him space to think, to feel, to decide. Finally, he turned back to her. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "I'd need to get recertified, take courses, pass exams. It would take time. We have time. I'm not in any hurry. This is too important to rush. And I'd want to make sure it's really accessible, not just lip service. Free care for anyone who needs it, regardless of insurance or immigration status or criminal history. No questions asked. That's exactly what I want too." Benjamin took a breath, let it out slowly. "I'll think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Victoria smiled despite the pain. "That's all I'm asking." As she turned to leave, leaning heavily on Mrs. Chen, Benjamin called after her. "Mrs. Harrison?" She turned back. "How's Emma doing? She was pretty scared that night." "She's okay. She asks about you. Wants to know when you'll teach her more things." Something like a smile touched Benjamin's face. Just barely, but it was there. Tell her I'll see her soon. I will. As they drove back through the city, Victoria leaned her head against the car window, exhausted, but oddly hopeful. She'd found her guardian angel. Now she just needed to convince him he could fly again. The next 12 months were transformative for everyone involved. Benjamin enrolled in a medical recertification program, studying at night after his janitorial shifts. The courses were intensive, refreshers on everything from trauma medicine to pharmacology, updates on new procedures and protocols, tests on material he'd once known by heart but had spent years trying to forget. He was terrified at first, convinced he'd fail, that he'd forgotten too much, that 8 years away from medicine had left him irreparably behind. But his hands remembered. His mind remembered. The knowledge was still there, buried under layers of grief and guilt, but not gone. He passed every exam on his first attempt. His instructors were impressed. This quiet man in his late 30s who studied with the intensity of someone half his age, who asked insightful questions and demonstrated clinical skills that took most doctors years to develop. While Benjamin studied, Victoria assembled a team to design the community health center. She hired architects who specialized in accessible, welcoming spaces, places that felt nothing like the cold, institutional hospitals that made people afraid to seek help. She consulted with social workers about what services were most needed in underserved communities. She met with community leaders, asking what would make people feel safe coming for care. Benjamin was involved in every decision. He insisted the center look nothing like a military field hospital. No sterile white walls, no intimidating reception desks, no sense that you were entering a place where bad things happened. Instead, they created a space with warm colors, comfortable seating, natural light flooding through large windows, a children's corner with toys and books, art on the walls from local artists, a space that felt like a sanctuary, not a medical facility. He personally interviewed every staff member. He wasn't looking for the most prestigious credentials. He wanted doctors and nurses who understood what it meant to serve people the system had failed. People who wouldn't judge a homeless man for his smell, or a sex worker for her choices, or an undocumented immigrant for his fear. People who believed, like he'd once believed, that medical care was a human right, not a privilege. And through it all, Emma was involved. She'd appointed herself the unofficial mascot of the project, showing up after school with her crayons and construction paper to help. She drew pictures for every exam room, cheerful, colorful drawings of smiling faces and happy animals. She insisted the waiting room needed a big toy box because kids get scared in hospitals and toys make everything better. She tested every chair for comfort, declared the water fountain too high for short people, and suggested they needed fish in the aquarium. Because fish are calming, Victoria and Benjamin found themselves spending more time together as the project progressed. What started as professional meetings evolved into longer conversations over coffee, then dinner, then walks through Boston Common discussing everything from medical ethics to Emma's latest obsession with marine biology. Victoria learned that Benjamin loved old jazz, hated modern art, and could quote entire scenes from The Princess Bride, that he'd wanted to be a marine biologist when he was a kid, just like Emma, but had become a doctor after watching a surgeon save his younger brother's life following a car accident. That he still had nightmares about Afghanistan, still sometimes woke up hearing explosions that weren't there. Benjamin learned that Victoria played piano beautifully, but only when no one was listening. That she'd wanted to be a teacher before her father's business consumed her life. That she felt guilty every single day for being a CEO instead of a full-time mother, even though she was giving Emma everything she never had. That she was terrified of failing, of losing everything her father had built, of not being good enough. They didn't talk about what was growing between them. Both had been too hurt, had lost too much to rush into anything. But it was there, in the way Benjamin's face softened when Victoria smiled, in the way Victoria's hand would linger on his arm when they said goodbye, in the way they both found excuses to spend more time together. Emma noticed. 6-year-olds always notice. "Mom," she said one night while Victoria was tucking her in, "are you and Mr. Benjamin going to get married?" Victoria nearly dropped the book she was holding. "What?" "Emma, we're working on a project together. But you like him. You smile different when you talk about him. And he likes you too. I can tell. It's complicated, baby. Why? Because I'm terrified, Victoria thought. Because I've been hurt before. Because he's still grieving his wife. Because we're both broken in ways that might not fit together. But she said, because sometimes adults need time to figure things out. I hope you figure it out, Emma said seriously. Because Mr. Benjamin would be a really good dad. He's patient and he listens and he teaches me things. And he makes you happy. I like when you're happy. Victoria kissed her daughter's forehead, blinking back tears. I like when I'm happy too, sweetheart. The Benjamin Carter. Community Health Center opened on a Saturday morning in early May. The weather was perfect. Clear blue skies, 72 degrees. The kind of spring day that made you believe anything was possible. The neighborhood turned out in force. People Victoria had never met. People Benjamin had treated in parking lots and alleys and abandoned buildings over the years. Families who'd never had reliable health care. Elderly folks who rationed their medications because they couldn't afford refills. Veterans, struggling with PTSD who couldn't navigate the VA system. Teenagers who needed someone to talk to, but didn't trust therapists in nice offices downtown. They came because word had spread. There was a place now where you could get help, real help. Without judgment, without impossible fees, without fear. A place run by the man who'd been quietly saving lives in the shadows for years. Dr. Carter, they called him now, though he still felt strange hearing it. Benjamin stood at the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. He wore hospital scrubs, blue ones, not the military fatigues he'd worn in Afghanistan. And for the first time in 8 years, they felt right, felt like coming home. By noon, every exam room was full. Children played with the toys Emma had insisted they needed. Adults filled out intake forms with shaking hands, barely believing this was real, that they could actually see a doctor without being turned away or bankrupted by bills they couldn't pay. Benjamin moved through it, all with calm efficiency, triaging cases, consulting with staff, conducting exams. A little girl with an ear infection who'd been crying for days because her parents couldn't afford urgent care. An elderly man with uncontrolled diabetes who'd been rationing insulin. A teenager with a badly infected cut that was on the verge of becoming septic. A mother having a panic attack because her baby had stopped breathing. The baby was fine, just congested, but the mother was so terrified and so relieved. When Benjamin showed her her child was okay, this was what he was meant for. This was who he was supposed to be. Victoria watched from the administrative office, seeing Benjamin come alive in a way she'd never seen before. The quiet janitor who'd saved her life had transformed into Dr. Carter, confident, compassionate, skilled. This was his true self, the person he'd been hiding for 8 years, and he was magnificent. That evening, after the last patient left and the staff was cleaning up, Victoria brought Chinese takeout to Benjamin's office. A small room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window looking out onto the street they'd just transformed. Successful first day? She asked, setting down containers of lo mein and kung pao chicken. Beyond anything I expected, Benjamin replied. His voice was tired but genuinely happy. We saw over 100 people today, helped them, really helped them. You helped them. This was your vision, our vision. I couldn't have done this without, you, the funding, the facility, the staff, the organization, all you. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, passing containers back and forth, shoulders occasionally brushing in the small space. Finally, Victoria spoke. I don't know what I would have done without you these past months. Not just the health center. Everything. You've been essential. Benjamin looked at her, really looked at her, and Victoria felt her breath catch. There was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Something warm and open and alive. You gave me a reason to stop hiding, he said quietly. You showed me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, that I could honor Sarah's memory by continuing the work she believed in, not by burying myself alive. Something shifted in the air between them, recognition of feelings that had been building for months, but neither had been brave enough to name. Before either could speak, there was a knock on the door. Are you done being mushy yet? Emma's voice called through the wood. 'Cause I want to show Dr. Benjamin something. Victoria and Benjamin both laughed, the tension breaking. We weren't being mushy, Victoria called back. The door opened, and Emma burst in, Mrs. Chen behind her. Totally we're being mushy. Adults think kids don't notice, but we notice everything. She thrust a piece of paper at Benjamin, another crayon masterpiece. This one showed Benjamin in blue scrubs, surrounded by smiling stick figures of all different colors and sizes. And in the corner, drawn with obvious care, was a smaller figure in what looked like nurse's clothing, with carefully drawn wings. That's your wife, Emma explained, her voice serious. Mom told me about her. I thought she should be in the picture too because she's watching you help people, and she's proud of you. Benjamin stared at the drawing, his vision blurred. This 6-year-old child understood something it had taken him 8 years to learn. That Sarah wasn't gone. That she lived on in the work he did, in the lives he saved, in the choice he made every day to keep healing instead of hiding. Thank you, Emma, he whispered, his voice thick. This is the best gift anyone has ever given me. Emma beamed, then turned to her mother. Can Dr. Benjamin come to dinner with us? Please. We should celebrate. This is a happy day. Victoria looked at Benjamin, a question in her eyes. Benjamin smiled, a real, full smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. I'd like that very much. Then it's settled, Emma declared. We're getting pizza and celebrating, and nobody's allowed to be sad because this is a happy day. She was right. It was a happy day. 2 years later, the Benjamin Carter Community Health Center had become a model for similar programs across the country. They'd expanded to include mental health services, addiction treatment, a pharmacy that filled prescriptions at cost, even a dental clinic. They treated hundreds of patients. Every week, saved dozens of lives every month. But for Benjamin, the greatest success wasn't the awards they'd won, or the recognition from medical journals, or the politicians who came to tour the facility and take photos. It was moments like this one. 8-year-old Emma Harrison Carter walked into his office after school, her backpack dragging on the floor, carrying a poster board decorated with carefully drawn diagrams. Dad Benjamin, she said. She'd started calling him that about 6 months. Go, after he and Victoria got married in a small ceremony at the community center, with all their patients as witnesses. Can you help me with my science fair project? I'm doing it about the heart, the physical heart, and also the metaphorical heart. Mrs. Rodriguez said I could do both. Benjamin looked at this child who'd saved him as surely as he'd saved her mother. This smart, funny, brave little girl who'd brought him back to life by refusing to let him hide. Of course, sweetheart, he said, making space on his desk. Let's talk about hearts. The kind that pump blood, and the kind that heal, and the kind that break and somehow find a way to beat again. Emma settled into the chair across from him, spreading out her drawings. I want to talk about how your heart got broken when your wife died, but then you helped people anyway, and then you fell in love with Mom, and your heart got fixed. It's a little more complicated than that, Benjamin said gently. Hearts don't really get fixed, but they do heal. They learn to beat in new rhythms. They learn to love again, even when we think we can't. That's what I want to explain in my project, how hearts are resilient. That means they're strong even when they're broken. That's a very good word, resilient. Where'd you learn that? Mom uses it when she talks about you. She says you're resilient. Benjamin felt his throat tighten. Your mom is pretty resilient too. She survived something terrible and became even stronger. Is that why you love her? Because she's strong? I love her for lots of reasons. Because she's strong, yes, but also because she's kind. Because she sees people, really sees them, including the parts they try to hide. Because she believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. He smiled at Emma. And because she gave me you, a whole ready-made family. That's pretty amazing. Emma grinned. I'm pretty amazing. You are indeed. They worked on the project together for the next hour. Benjamin explaining cardiac anatomy while Emma drew hearts in red crayon and wrote definitions in her neat second-grade handwriting. They talked about heartbeats and blood flow and also about metaphorical hearts, how they could break and heal, how loving someone was a risk but a worthy one, how the human heart had a remarkable capacity for resilience. That evening, when Victoria came to pick up Emma after finishing her work at Harrison Technologies, she'd promoted someone else to CEO and now worked part-time, having finally found a balance between being a business leader and being present for her family. She found them together at Benjamin's desk, father and daughter, bent over a science fair poster covered in anatomical drawings and crayon hearts, their heads close together, laughing about something Emma had written. Victoria stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching. This was her family now. This was home. Not the big house in Beacon Hill she'd bought or the corner office she'd earned. Just this, the people she loved, together. "Ready to go home?" she asked. Benjamin looked up and smiled. The smile came easily now, naturally. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it no longer defined him. He'd learned to carry Sarah's memory without being crushed by it. Learned to honor her by living the life she'd believed in. A life of service and compassion and love. Always, he said. Because home wasn't a place anymore. It was wherever Victoria and Emma were. It was the clinic where he healed people. It was the community he served. It was the life he'd built from the ashes of the one he'd lost. As they locked up the clinic for the night, Benjamin took one last look at the lobby. On the wall hung Emma's crayon drawing from 2 years ago, professionally framed now, Dr. Benjamin in scrubs, surrounded by smiling stick figures, and in the corner, Sarah with carefully drawn angel wings watching over it all. "I think she'd be proud of you," Victoria whispered, taking his hand. Benjamin squeezed her fingers. "I think she would be. Not because I forgot her, not because the pain went away completely, but because I finally understood that the best way to honor her memory was to keep living, keep healing, keep loving." They walked out into the warm summer evening, Emma between them, holding both their hands and chattering about her science fair project and whether they should get ice cream on the way home. Benjamin looked at this life he'd built, this second chance he'd been given by a terrified 6-year-old who'd grabbed his hand in a moment of crisis and refused to let go. The invisible man had finally become visible again, not because someone looked at him, but because he'd finally allowed himself to be seen, allowed himself to be loved, allowed himself to believe he was worthy of both, and that, he realized, made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, remember that everyone deserves a second chance. Every broken person is worth saving. Every hidden hero deserves to be seen. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you believe in love that heals the deepest wounds, in redemption, in the power of human connection to transform lives. And remember, we're all just waiting for someone who sees us, really sees us, broken parts and all, and chooses to love us anyway. Because sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, in the most unlikely moments, from the people we never saw coming. And that's the most beautiful kind of love there is.